So welcome everyone to our third and final lecture of June 2021 as part of the Literacies, the GIP, the group between the University of Cincinnati and the Universität Duisburg-Essen. I'm Professor Evan Torner, and I'm just here to do the moderation. Our speaker today is Olga Hart, who's a senior librarian and coordinator of library instruction here at the University of Cincinnati Libraries. Her publications and presentations cover a range of topics related to information literacy instruction, including students' engagement, teaching best practices in visual communication, and preparing students for applying their research and presentation skills in the work environment. I also want to say on a personal note, I've worked with Olga for 7 or I guess it's 8 years this year, and it's been a fantastic ride. But I also want to say that knowing her style, she wants this to be more of a conversation than a lecture, and so please do feel welcome to put your thoughts in the chat, or to ask to use the hand raise reaction to raise your hand, and then we will break the chain and answer your question actually. So I hope that's enough of an introduction. Willkommen natürlich an die deutschen Kolleginnen und ich hoffe, dass wir hier ist es kein Vortrag. Und ich hoffe, dass es ist nicht zu spät wird. So. Take it away.
Thank you, Evan. Can you hear me well? Okay, great. I don't know what I look like in the screen because the light in this room is terrible, but at least I'm far away from the dog, so hopefully at least we won't have audio interruptions. As Evan said, that will not be sort of a traditional lecture like the other ones. I was very nervous about it. I still am because, this is not like any kind of original research, and I'm not going to say anything kind of groundbreaking. Mine is not a big name in the library science and publications, but I am excited about this opportunity to talk to both faculty and graduate students from different institutions. Very interested to have German colleagues in the audience and hear what if they can relate to our situations and concerns and how they approach them. But of course, I want to make sure that we have a shared definition of information literacy. I would like to raise awareness of our efforts, and please remember that I am speaking from my own perspective as a UC librarian. And I'm going to focus specifically on areas where we feel that our information literacy efforts are not keeping up with realities, and invite you to think what we can do to provide more coherent information literacy education. And so I see it as a conversation, as an invitation to future conversations that we need to have if we want to take our shared efforts to a new level. And I hope that the 3-year time frame will allow us to get started, at least if there is an interest. And then, of course, I'll share with you the resources that librarians are looking at or looking forward to, the newest publications. So if you want to keep up with the most recent development. So the Association of College and Research Libraries defines information literacy as the set of integrated abilities encompassing the reflective discovery of information, the understanding of how information is produced and values, and the use of information in creating new knowledge and participating ethically in communities of learning. So to assist librarians and educators in implementing that vision of information literacy, a framework has been developed, and it organized into 6 frames, each consisting of a concept central to information literacy, a set of knowledge practices, and a set of disposition. So the document describes what both novice and expert learners need to understand and do for each of the 6 frames or core concepts. Work on the framework was strongly influenced by research and publications by Mackey and Jacobson, who made a strong argument that in the situation where new literacies related to technology developments emerge, and educators try to introduce students to their foundational concepts, literacy efforts may focus on specificity of formats and overlook shared literacy goals related to critical thinking and information skills. So the authors proposed a meta-literacy approach that would recognize expanded abilities needed by an information literate person and provide common ground for those striving to be fully literate regardless of media. The framework, the information literacy framework, draws significantly upon the concept of meta-literacy, and many dispositions in the final document require learning engagement in activities that promote metacognitive thinking in order to be information literate. We will return to meta-literacy further in the conversation. I just want to mention that meta-literacy emphasizes 4 learning domains: cognitive, behavioral, affective, and metacognitive. So the cognitive and behavioral aspects have always been present and incorporated into the information literacy definition, but the affective and metacognitive aspects encourage individuals, on the one hand, to differentiate between cognitive and affective responses to information and recognize their biases, and on the other hand, to be aware of the consequences of potential level of their responses. It is often thought that librarians teach information literacy. I would actually say that faculty do, and we are just helping. However, it is not really very straightforward where information literacy instruction is happening. It is very difficult to coordinate information literacy efforts at the institutional level. And this problem is not UC specific. Pretty much anybody will attest to that. And in a recent study, it's titled Information Literacy at the Age of Algorithms, students described the exposure to information literacy and critical thinking from elementary school through college as scattered, inadequate, and disconnected. So the UC faculty here are probably well familiar with the Gen Ed core, general education core, and the baccalaureate competences included in it. And I already see a great deal of overlap between some of them. And then there's this statement that information literacy is a fundamental component of the 4 baccalaureate competences and must permeate every component of the general education core. So kind of overlaying this, some colleges or programs may also choose focus on digital or media literacy, and thus kind of narrow focus from shared literacy goals related to critical thinking of information skills. And I'm afraid that students may fail to see the connection between the knowledge and skills acquired in different courses, and there's plenty of evidence that they don't transfer those skills from one course to another. So in a way, I like the idea that information literacy permeates the content of all courses, because if that's indeed happening, students get constant affirmation of the importance of information literacy skills and their role in their life and careers. So ideally, through conversations and meaningful assignments, we should help students to put information competencies and skills in context so that they get the picture of the information environment and their roles as consumers and producers of information. Somehow I'm particularly concerned, and I don't know if you echo my concern, is that our rapid transition due to COVID to online instruction sort of impeded our ability to have these meaningful conversations, because I think particularly in asynchronous courses, students tend to move from module to module, from assignment to assignment, and complete a series of actions rather than contemplate what they're learning and why, and where they need to take their learning. And I don't know if anybody would disagree with that, but I'm afraid that we will still have to deal with the consequences of this predominantly online instruction for a while.
Oh yeah, I do have a question just to normalize interjection here a little bit, but there's a kind of, there was an ongoing crisis before COVID hit about, you know, what are students actually learning, or what are they, you know, able to you know, comprehend in our courses. And then, you know, as with all the crises, COVID-19 seems to have exacerbated or exaggerated it. What I'm wondering then is, you know, how much it was the remote learning environment really the culprit behind this, you know, students falling behind, and how much was it, you know, sort of an earlier environment imported? And this is, again, you can speak off the cuff, you can provide any answer you want, but I'm very much thinking about sort of long-term imported ideology, child rearing practices, and media saturation as other factors in the room besides what we're doing in the classroom.
Right. You know, I think I would prefer not to answer this question immediately, but kind of take it as a question for further exploration.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's my first question that came to mind, is how do we isolate what happened during COVID-19, so when we return to normal, quote unquote, that we know what we have at our disposal, I guess.
Right, but I'm really concerned that we will have students who have never been to the classroom, who have never been a college classroom, who have never been to the library. So there will be a process of multiple acculturations going on. So I think that this really merits, as I've said, that this is an invitation to conversations. And I think this is definitely one of those conversations that we will want to have.
And one more point from the chat, which I thought you might be interested in, Olya. Frauke Kling says, my experience as a German academic librarian has been that online instruction has made librarians more accessible to students. We've seen a sharp decline in reference questions in the library buildings over the last decades, yet the feedback from our online students has been that it gave them the impression there's a knowledgeable staff on call for them to tune into when they need the help.
Well, but I think there is instruction and instruction. Yes, we have been there for students to answer questions, but it varied tremendously. In some courses where we're embedded as librarians, we've never heard from students. So does it mean everything's going great? So they are just reading the online content and kind of going without ever having any conversations or those contemplations. I'm just afraid that, and I will elaborate on it later, that, students were sort of employing separate skills without ever putting them into the big picture. Because, completing an assignment and doesn't necessarily mean a huge step towards becoming information literate.
No more interruptions from me. You can keep going.
One, on the other hand, when we talk about information literacy permeating the content, it is hard to tell where it's really happening. So it is very difficult to identify courses that explicitly state information literacy outcomes and assess them. And the thing is, I think that we may have forgotten what it's like not to be information literate or information fluent. And for us who are processing and using information, and for us processing and using information has become so natural as, as using language that we are proficient in. So when we tell students, you may want to take a look at it and give them a citation, we may not realize that for them it means deciphering a treasure map. There is a whole lot of skills that go behind finding that. So maybe we should be a little bit more cognizant of that discrepancy and where our students are and what we're asking them to do. And so when we ask students to do something that has to do with information, maybe we can help them reflect on what they're doing and how the skill can be developed and applied. So I would like to talk about what we do as librarians, and hopefully it will result in increased awareness and closer collaboration. So we provide resources for the collection, which a lot we do at your request and in support of the new courses. We have excellent examples here at UC, where with a lot of your help and participation, we developed our collections, for example, of game studies and German film. So we provide research and reference support, including personal consultations, and in upper level undergraduate education, those personal consultations play a huge role. Then library sessions and all kinds of online tools for you to plug in. So accessibility is not the only considerations between those, but it's also for you to be able to use those tools in a flexible manner. So I'm going to talk a little bit about library sessions and when and where they occur. So in our ideal vision, we we always aspired to have more presence in the classroom with upper level and capstone at capstone level. However, the reality is such that it happens rarely for some reason. Yes, there are consultations going on, but we don't see the same kind of level of engagement with students at that level. It does make sense that a lot of our engagement occurs in first year courses, specifically in first year English composition, because habits of mind listed in the framework for success in post-secondary writing are consistent with information literacy dispositions. And it's also great to kind of to have this exposure and personal contact, because we hope that it encourages students to see librarians as partners in education, as persons whom they can trust, and they are more likely to seek help from us. So as far as mid-collegial or discipline-specific research, for some reason, we have few requests for sessions. I guess there are assumptions that students have acquired those skills. And when presenting to students who are expected to have experience, I would ask them to demonstrate how they would approach the task and then suggest other strategies. And this usually goes very well. That puts students in the role of a teacher and allows them to demonstrate their practices and sometimes really great insights. So since I said that we are only contributors, so maybe faculty provide their own instruction at the upper level. And we have heard from many English professors, for example, who have attended library sessions with their students for many years, that we sort of, what we accomplished is sort of like train the trainers, and they are sort of, they're comfortable teaching some research skills and concepts. And we are really trying to be humble about the impact of our library instruction, because it's you who reinforce the message and make it stick. So the library sessions, so unfortunately, we are kind of very locked in. Well, first of all, we have a very limited time frame. Then faculty have certain expectations that the session will be hands-on and have tangible outcomes. Typically, that students will walk out with, having found X sources and maybe imported citations. Sometimes we are asked to send sort of an inoculation message, typically, to prevent plagiarism. We are trying to be as flexible as we can, because sometimes students walk in and we just see that they are not there yet. It's just like Evan was saying in our first conversation, that, if you discover that students, for example, in our case, they came to learn to cite sources, but they don't even have a research topic yet, and all they worry about is figuring out the research question. So we kind of need to backtrack, stop, and kind of repackage on the fly what we're going to have. So due to all those constraints, we have very limited opportunities to engage in meaningful conversations. And therefore, we try to sneak in some thoughts that we feel that are important to bring up, so whenever an opportunity presents itself. And what I love about our contacts with students is that we observe them and we learn a lot about their research skills by observations. And when I walk around the classroom and see that some common problems, I immediately address them. So as I've said, we also develop, and the German colleagues mentioned that, and that was very, very helpful during the pandemic. We really stepped up on developing online instruction materials that range from mini tutorials to printable handouts to longer videos or Canvas modules that you can plug them in before or in place of classroom instruction or as a follow-up, so that if students need to revisit what they learned in the classroom, they will have an some kind of an online tool to go back for. So the most successful tutorials and modules are those that we develop in collaboration with you. And thank you very much for your input into developing those online guides, for suggesting topics for tutorials and guides, and providing feedback, because if you don't like what we build, you won't be using it. So we really love to listen to you before we even start offering the tool, and definitely modifying based on your input. And typically we like to share our instructional materials for broader use. So this is also our contribution to the profession. So in addition to the tools developed by us, there are multiple sites where educators can find all kinds of lesson plans, analogies, assignments, whatnot, to support their information literacy efforts. So how are we doing with all this, with all that slew of online and face-to-face instruction? Are we succeeding in information literacy instruction? Unfortunately, since most of us are not instructors of record, and we don't always see students' final papers. So our sources of evidence are reference questions, sources used in assignments, and again, we rely on you to tell us, and thank you to those of you who let us know that, oh, I think it was really successful this semester because students really used better sources. Student reflections and final projects, again, thank you to those of us who invite us to see student final presentations, share student reflections, which may be solicited or unsolicited. And this is extremely valuable to us. Then, of course, in conversations, you often express certain concerns to which we listen. And then there are national surveys or studies that pretty much confirm what our own observations. And, there are hardly ever any surprises. So when you are looking at these findings, does anything surprise you? And by the way, the study of, one of the studies had both graduates and employers as respondents, and the other, so the most critical assessments really come from employers. Those are the ones who would say that students are lacking in persistence. They can perform tasks that are given to them, but have difficulty coming up with questions, are inclined to use top sources and fail to see patterns and connections. So
I think I've got a short response, which is in my own when I was educated in secondary education pedagogy a million years ago, like 2002 to 2004. Our theory was all on an intrinsic motivation model, right? Where we were told that the students already kind of know what they want, right? And they're already there with pre-established needs and interests, and we just need to supply the tools and kind of the group environment for them to ask those big questions. But I actually think that your point number one, ability to ask your own research questions on their own, is more apt to my experience now in 2021, where students don't know what they want. They don't even know what they're interested in. And so it's sort of like cutting through that fog to find a self that is curious about the world and curious about asking these questions is actually a lot of our assignment. And that's a shift from when I started teaching, where it was much more of a crowd where they were like, yeah, I already know everything. You just need to, sort of show me the door and give me permission to research it. And now I don't see that among my students at all.
I have a question or comment, if it's okay. It's Tanya
okay.
speaking. Olga,
Yes.
if you cannot see me.
yeah.
Wonderful to see you, Olga, and listening to you. It's really interesting. So I wonder, Evan, as a reaction, is it something like a golden age phenomenon, where we always say early in our life it was better, and the older we get, the more we are going to say it, right? So I'm not saying society is not changing. What is interesting for me in this context is going back to our values, our core values, where we talk about social responsibility and so on, and information literacy. And I'm not sure what the connection between the fields is. So going with Evan, are we critical? Is it important to be able to think critically before we are able to use information literacy in the best manner? Or is information literacy the thing that we actually need to be able to come up with research questions, right? So what is the connection between those terms? I'm completely undecided right now. And I'm not saying there is a solution, but I'm really, really interested where we are heading in our societies. And Olga, it doesn't mean you have to have an answer. Sorry. It's more like I'm looking at the situation and I sometimes wonder.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. Yeah, and there is more to come about questions, because that's the core, really, right? So if people don't have questions, if they don't want to pursue questions they're genuinely interested in, what's the point of research activity? Okay, so the study of so in this particular study, and it's a more recent study from like 2020 actually, this study paints a slightly more optimistic picture, but again, the respondents are upper level undergraduates. So they actually, interestingly, they do see themselves as persisting. But again, it's a big question whether they persist in like completing a prescribed assignment, or like persistent to the point that, sort of ready to go way above and beyond. So it's interesting that that survey is titled Apprenticing Researchers, Exploring Upper Division Students' Information Literacy Competences, because the study finds that largely upper level undergraduate information literacy competences are at the level of novices rather than experts. So they haven't progressed to the kind of level that we probably would have liked to see. However, there are some, again, in their opinion, they realize that research process includes behaviors beyond information seeking, which I think is wonderful. So at the same time, they rely on assignment parameters and tend to default to minimum source requirements. And the authors of the study offer an interesting explanation to that, that students probably have limited capacity to integrate new materials or synthesize a large volume of information. So, and I mean, I guess there are also explanations to the fact that they're not motivated enough, that it's just kind of like satisficing, right? So meeting minimum requirements. But I do believe that there is something to be said to the students' inability. They get so intimidated by the results, particularly when they are asked to use peer-reviewed sources. It's not something that they're used to. It takes them a huge amount of time to read, understand those sources, and so they tend to stick with minimum requirements. So an interesting observation was also that lack of expertise in the discipline also interferes with their ability to find suitable keywords. And we see a lot of that in the classroom. And that's where we like to spend a lot of time, often working in tandem with the course instructor, because I may not have, for example, the vocabulary for some of the searches in upper level courses. So we would work in tandem to help students with that. I am afraid that many bad, kind of poor and undeveloped information literacy practices have been sort of encouraged by your typical college assignments. This is literally my recent question I received on chat. I need an article on, let's say, nursing with a DOI. That's all the students. So you can see how much kind of contemplation went into completing that assignment. Well, however, in the United States, the difference between public and academic libraries are that public libraries are supposed to provide an answer, and academic libraries provide a path. So I told the student which databases they would use to find articles with DOIs, because I understand that it's actually not an isolated assignment, that it's super common in some professional programs to ask, just find 5 peer-reviewed articles with DOIs published within five years. But I also pointed her to the online guide where she can find assistance. And she was so thrilled to see that, because as I've said, the courses in the discipline require a lot of research, and students would like to know where to get started. And then, of course, the infamous, I have written my paper and now I need to have 5 sources. And I know that people in this discussion know exactly, who this can be attributed to, but unfortunately, it's not a single student. We see this very commonly. So the students see a requirement to use sources as something totally separate and kind of a headache, and not something that is like looking into an ongoing conversation, analyzing a conversation, and engaging in a dialogue. So clearly, a lot of assignments are taken by students out of context. And as far as parameters, I personally have mixed feelings about assignments prohibiting the use of Google and Wikipedia and requiring exclusively peer-reviewed sources. I do understand that we need to show students how to access resources in the discipline and how to read scholarly articles. But as the study of undergraduate research competences shows, many participants rely heavily on scholarly articles and database peer-reviewed filters to obtain authoritative voices. So they are looking for formal indications of authority. So in addition, not all our graduates will continue in academia, right? So you teach in the College of Arts and Sciences, you know that a lot of your students will have other careers. So student participants in the Project Information Literacy 2020 study expressed that they could see no particular connection between what they were asked to do for school and the kinds of information practices they need for everyday life. So indeed, many assignments emphasize solitary nature of knowledge acquisition and dissemination and use of approved sources. And overall, traditional assignments fail to consider the changing information landscape. Also, interestingly, students learn to rely on licensed resources, and in studies, graduates express frustration with lack of resources that they used to be available to them on campus. And we, through chat, through phone calls, we constantly hear complaints from our alumni who learn to rely on certain databases and they cannot access them anymore. So in addition, graduates are and will be using Google or whatever search engines for a variety of their personal needs. So in my opinion, we should be explicit about our concerns about those search tools and technologies that they are using in real life, but not to tell them that, this is not something you can use. I think we can also help our students by sharing how we as professionals, okay, you are leaving academia, but you will still have access. You may still have access to specialized databases because in Ohio, public libraries provide that access. Your company or organization may have a library subscription services just to help them make that transition. So what will their support network be? So I would like to go back to study findings and go back to common problem areas, those that we particularly see in the classroom, and we gonna try to troubleshoot. So inability to ask questions, and we already started with that. So we definitely see a lot of it with first-year students who may be given freedom when choosing a research question, and they have difficulty breaking beyond yes/no type question. And I don't know whether it's like lack of motivation, as Evan noted, maybe they are really not interested in anything, which is very hard to believe how you can not be interested in anything at this age. But but they tend to ask questions that would be sort of easy to answer rather than lead to another series of questions, and that what we would expect to happen in real life. So how do we teach students that the initial question may not necessarily result in the answer, but may lead to other questions, more complex questions, or maybe the total revision of the original question? And I think this is another conversation that I would like to have with you, maybe like a panel at the our Center for excellence in teaching and learning, I would like to hear how faculty in different disciplines encourage students to open their minds and ask questions that can take them on a more complex path. Overall, I feel that students are not comfortable with complexity and ambiguity. Well, is that fair to say, you think? I find it very difficult to get across to them that the research process is not a journey from point A to point B. And I actually tell them that I hate those graphics that are often embedded in their, tutorials that they find on YouTube that portray research process as a nice straight line or an arrow or like a circle. Because indeed, I tell them that, if I were to draw a diagram of a research process, it will not be at all pretty. It's very complex because, each step you take in the research process informs you in a different way and may kind of cause you revise the entire path. However, while I love sharing personal practices, and I'm sure you do too, I personally see that students, at least undergraduate students, do not seem to be very receptive of suggestions to use different research practices. For example, I spend time in each class session showing them how to work effectively with results. For example, they found the first article that seems relevant or somewhat relevant, and how you can examine the article for the language. This is a wonderful way to find the keywords. Like if you fail to, your search results are only as good as the search that you entered, right? And if you don't have the vocabulary, your first relevant results may help you, right? And one way they help you is by pointing you to relevant sources, right? They show you who the experts are. And, I encourage them to explore other works by the same author, encourage them to use citations they find, but very rarely do I see them actually doing that. So what I see them doing is going back to their search results. Yeah, probably that wasn't good. And, maybe they will modify their search words. Maybe they will get frustrated and go to Google, or maybe they will stay within the confines of their favorite, new favorite database and just slightly modify their research strategy. Whereas I must say that when one student realizes the importance and the difference that the right keywords make, they are very impressed typically, and they kind of start searching. And by the way, I want to say that because some of the faculty and students here are interested in teaching languages and working with learners of a second or other languages, I would say that finding keywords, we find it a wonderful exercise for vocabulary building with language learners. So going back to our research findings, so I don't think anybody was surprised that employers feel that students tend to use top results served by a search engine. And I think, I don't know what your gut feeling is, but I definitely see that in class. I see which sources they pull, and oftentimes it is the top few results. So I usually make it a point to explain to students how search engines rank results. and ask them if they understand how Google ranks results and what may be the different factors at play. And it's interesting that students actually have a lot more insight into the role of algorithms and associated problems than we expect. But I also think that having this conversation again allows students to show what they need, to show what they know, and teach others, because there may be very different awareness levels in a classroom of, for example, the role of algorithms. So also when we sort of interrupt the typical flow of a class session and kind of bring up an issue that was not like in the previously stated learning outcomes, and particularly when we ask students to weigh in, I think it sort of slows things down, and this pause, this mini conversation may help students retain the information, what they learned better. So we already talked, we already mentioned that students equate authority with certain formats. And I would like to mention a course, and UC faculty may want to know about this course because this is a required course that all your students take, and you may capitalize on that in your discipline. So in mid-collegiate English composition, students learn to analyze discourse across a variety of formats. And they begin to recognize that information may be packaged differently perceived differently based on the format it is packaged. And they are asked to look at the information creation and dissemination practices of certain discourse communities. And this particular assignment so in this particular assignment, different faculty approach it differently. Students may be asked to analyze a discourse community of their chosen subject area or major, which I think is a valuable first glance at traditional and emerging processes of information creation and dissemination in their chosen professional area, whereas looking at the communities, maybe very informal communities to which they belong themselves, or encourages students to think about ways they themselves produce and share information. And so very importantly, students need to learn to think critically, not only about the sources, but also about the underlying publishing process and technologies used to create and distribute the results. And probably last but not least, the technologies that make the results discoverable. So these are just some examples of conversations that may occur in the classroom, and there are more and more topics, great conversations for any course, and maybe these conversations are happening, maybe they're happening in your courses, maybe they're happening in courses tagged with critical thinking or social responsibility. So here are some, I talked about some of the problems, there is no way to cover that. I think I already, I haven't looked at the time, but I feel like I've been going on forever. But those all most of the examples I shared, I just kind of like those micro conversations. And so how do we go to a different level? So students' skill levels and attitudes regarding information search, retrieval, and use are shaped largely by practical constraints of the academic environment, rather than by the objective, more objective or universal measures of information literacy competence. So as a result, student actions represent a set of prescribed steps. We often see that, and they don't encourage contemplation and transferability. So these are some of the things that come to mind that can help. And here I am circling back to the concept of meta-literacy because it moves library instruction away from a focus on text-based information produced by academic communities and affirms the value of multiple formats. It helps to move away from perception of information literacy as a set of skills and encourages knowledge acquisition in collaboration with others. So the definition and vision of a meta-literate learner has been evolving, and this diagram is from an anticipated resource that is coming up shortly. So what really appeals to me about meta-literacy is the recognition of a learner as a teacher. And articulating that would help create courses where the outcomes would include a student's participation in a project or possibly creation of a tool resource that would be sort of the true, capstone, the crowning achievement of students' work, and also can be used for example, for community education. So there are multiple sources on meta-literacy that can help you. Meta-literacy can be used to develop learning goals that are relevant to any disciplines. And so these are some of the books published over the past few years that have plenty of examples of courses that have been designed or redesigned to incorporate the meta-literate mindset. And then there is also a site, metaliteracy.org, that has resources for both learners and educators. And then, of course, information literacy is pretty much alive. And so I already mentioned the sandbox, where you can find all kinds of ideas for integrating information literacy into instruction. And the Project Information Literacy is a very interesting site. If you kind of ask me what information librarians like to read and where recent interesting conversations can be found, it's on the side project of Project Information Literacy. There is a provocation series that publishes like an interesting original essay once a month. And then there is actually a conference on information literacy. It's a European conference, but it takes place in Europe, but it attracts librarians, educators, publishers, and people from all walks of life. So in 2019, it was supposed to happen in Bamberg. Then the conference made a decision to that it will occur every other year. So in 2020, it didn't happen for obvious reasons. And the decision was made that this year's conference will be online. So it's in September. Please check it out. We still hope that at some point it will happen in Bamberg. You know, since we're encouraged at our institution to come up with bold ideas, here are some of my bold ideas. They may be bold-ish because, you know, in other institutions, I'm sure there are people have already come up with much greater ideas and are far much further along in terms of implementations. But these are some of the things that I would love to happen. I would love to form partnerships, particularly at the upper undergraduate level, incorporate reflection on learning into capstone courses, develop interdisciplinary courses, because, you know, Tanya was talking about, you know, bringing disciplinary barriers. And I think information literacy and disciplinary barriers just don't go together very well. So I also think, wouldn't it be wonderful to involve students in digital scholarship projects that will help to see patterns and connections? You know, help students see themselves as peer teachers. So here are my kind of boldish ideas. And I apologize that, you know, my conversation has, you know, has been going on and on and on. But I am wondering if you're interested in continuing the conversation. And so on a personal level, would you like to build something into your courses for next year, for the year after? Can we do something as part of this 3-year project? And who do you think would be interested on campus and how we can approach them? And how can I help? Well, thank you. And I hope that there is still time for questions.
Thank you. And there is time. Again, a round of virtual applause for your talk. And if you want to close screen sharing, then we will then be in sort of a round table discussion here on all of the very interesting points that you've raised that I think are highly relevant to our everyday practices as graduate students and faculty. So yeah, please.
Thank you so much, Olga. And I mean, as Evan said in the introduction, it's really so wonderful and valuable to be working with you. And I think you've helped our students and myself a lot through the years. Just, I don't know, there's so many points that I could elaborate on, but maybe one of them, I don't know if it has so much to do with necessarily the information literacy part or the research part, and more with the question of what kind of, what we even define as information and what kind of material we give them. Because, I mean, I've told this anecdote many times, but my experience teaching media studies is that students will tell me outright, we do not read and we are not going to read. Even if you assign a text, we will not read it. And instead of fighting that, I just change the material that I give to them. And so it's far more digital, it's far more visual. And I do work with these more kind of, you know, applied projects where they do get the theory, but it's kind of a bit through a detour by actually working with material. And so part of the change that is happening is that quite a lot of information that they access is not necessarily through reading anymore. So that is the one, I guess, comment, but also question. If we don't also need to broaden, you know, the what we define as information and what kind of material we give them access to. And also because you mentioned COVID, I actually found teaching media studies online beneficial for having these kinds of discussions about what it means to move in a digital environment and have discussions in a digital environment. And so it was actually not detrimental. So I think it might also have a little bit to do with the material. And the last point is that I think part of the problem is that students on the one hand think they already know kind of how to use the library and how to do the research. So how do you get them to the point that there's really quite a lot more out there? And also, how do you make it fun? Because I think for them, it's really just extremely tiring, dusty, and not at all exciting to do research in the sense of actually accessing the library homepage, searching for material, putting together, you know, a bibliography, learning how to cite correctly, things like that. I mean, it's kind of necessary to learn it, but it's somehow, I think, you know, there's only very, very few people out there who would think that it's exciting and fun. So how do you make it more like a treasure hunt or something else?
Oh, you brought up so many interesting points here. Well, for one thing, I think it's fascinating to hear that, you know, in your area that you found that COVID teaching during COVID was not detrimental, because in a way, I think they were learning about being online and all the, you know, all the pros and cons and all the, you know, every shade of that experience by actually living the experience. But I think that it would be also interesting to have courses when we go back to face in which we contemplate about experiences, you know, that we have had, and kind of not just kind of turn a new page. Well, the fact that you are not, you know, that you are going away from texts, this is actually consistent with meta-literacy, right? That encourages to move away from text-based only materials because, you know, in the world, we are not surrounded with texts. So, and yeah, and literacy is required when we come into contact with all kinds of materials. So I think there is no contradiction here. Well, as far as fun goes, I don't know what are these things. Do you feel that, you know, research and work and, you know, getting information that we need for work is always fun? I mean, you know, when they are going into the real world, and some of them will be working in industries and everything, I think there is a certain you know, at what point do they come to realization that not everything will be fun, that some things will be frustrating but necessary? I don't know. But I see what you're saying. You know, yes, there should be, you know, it's very important to motivate students. But on the other hand, they are adults. I don't know. It's a complicated, and so that is another interesting conversation. Would be to have, like, for example, at CETL, right, or at the faculty engagement center, to see the kind of different viewpoints on that. But I think when you provide really interesting assignments like, you know, Evan's quests or Tanya's where students present what they learned at the conference, and they learn how to put together a conference. It's I think it's super exciting.
Tanya is next.
I think what can better motivate people and be more rewarding, that particularly for those who have never participated in the conference, have never doesn't know how to go about organizing a conference, but they figure it out, and then they present. And I think that tremendous sense of accomplishment is a motivation factor.
However, Olga, I can tell you organizing a conference with undergrad students is not fun at all sometimes. Even if the outcome is really good, I do believe it was, the fairy tale conferences really were fun to a certain extent. So I wonder, because I'm stuck with your sentence of perceiving you as assistant in my seminar. I'm going to teach here, I'm pulling you in already in my seminar. I'm going to teach a seminar about nature. And so we can have our conversations about nature in a completely different environment in the next semester. I'm so looking forward. However, to be a bit more serious, I was wondering, listening to you, thinking through where we are in America more than in Germany, actually, with how fast our students have to produce, how fast they have to act, how much they have to do, that academia and being an, if you want to name it to a certain extent, and a cycle that is really capitalistic in the way how it behaves faster and faster, and putting in more and more, being more and more confined what they actually have to learn, what we are saying, what is important also, right? And they adapt to what we actually tell them to do. If one of the solutions actually is slowing down, I'm completely right now advocating for a slow academia. If no one knows, I am doing it since a few months. I'm totally for slowing down. It's also because my brain is on a circuit that doesn't function any longer. So for me, the question is how to actually work in an environment that is counterproductive to actually producing knowledge or deep knowledge, deep understanding, critical thinking, because we are looking in a complete different direction, definitely in American academia. And the other question connected to it, but only maybe tangentially, is the question of affects, emotions, how we actually deal with situations where the frustration level is very high, where the disappointment is very high sometimes, because you tell them, write a paper, them, whoever them is in my moment here, or myself. Like, I'm waiting now for books for 4 months because you cannot order them earlier. And I don't want to spend so much money on the books, to be honest. So I'm sitting here and I'm totally frustrated because I don't have the books in my hand, right? But I can do so because I'm planning 5 months or 6 months ahead, right? This is my time. This is where I can slow down, where I have the different timelines in my life, where I'm organizing it. And there are all these emotions in between. And I sometimes wonder how to navigate a situation where all these emotions are present and are not present at the same time, and actually touch upon every level you were talking about. So it's two different directions, but both where I actually think we're in a point of time where I don't know if it is about students don't do as much as they did earlier. They don't have precise questions, because to be honest, I don't know if I had really precise questions in my first semester. And Rolf, I'm not going to ask you anything about me being a student at one point in my life. Really, don't answer this question. So for me, it's more a question how to deal with this Gordian knot, maybe, where I have the feeling it's going in too many directions that are actually not connected to what is happening in America, in academia, and is more connected to other systems and not knowledge production systems only. So, and again, it's more a question for all of us than solely for you, Olga.
I've got the floor for the next comment, which is, I think I'm giving a talk later this month. Actually, together simulations, if you will, games, in some degree, you know, are thousands of years old, and in some ways circumscribe all these different other forms of media. One thing that happens every generation is that each group of educators, every generation, rediscovers that, oh, play can teach people things, but it's also pretty dangerous. It's a cycle. You know, we even saw those in the simulations with the 60s, that the kids separated with brown eyes and blue eyes, and these kinds of classroom simulations. And so where I'm at is I love teaching with this method. It's also very time intensive, very energy intensive. And if you have to worry about educational outcomes, it's very difficult to see them sometimes in the play, because the play, if it's good, is emergent. It'll produce a variety of different situations. And of course, the students can reflect on that. That's not an issue. The main issue is, what if the situation gets out of hand? Or if the situation produces a, you know, a point where the students like sort of minimally contribute, but it's not enough energy to provide play for anyone else, so the whole experiment kind of flags. And to give an example, I ran an entire papal election game in the spring where they were trying to elect a pope in 1492. The students chose to elect the same Pope, Rodrigo Borgia, who was actually the worst possible choice, but they chose to replicate history because it was just easy to do that. And they barely wrote any correspondence back and forth, and engaged any of the game mechanisms, which meant some of the all-star players, which included the faculty, from the history department, they had undue influence over the game. So there was a point where I thought, okay, what are we even teaching here, right? We're teaching that, you know, powerful people will come in and exert a huge influence, and also that it's easier to sort of go with the fixed quantity than it is to, to experiment with something new. And of course, those are valuable lessons, but I'm not certain that the students actually had them formally articulated to them. And then, you know, how then does their own research or literacy of what they just experienced, you know, I mean, the reason why I even run this stuff is because I believe that student emotion is important. They should know how to feel with regards to the material, and I'm not telling them how to feel, but they should have an emotional reaction to the material before they're then motivated to explore it more. That's where I'm coming from. But the question is, these simulations are large, they're unwieldy, and sometimes they don't quite work. What do we do then in these kind of game situations? Whereas I do kind of treasure a more formal research process where, you know, you have your questions, you have your materials, everything is contained to some degree. It's of course, everything is messier than that, but I like that fantasy anyway. All right, if that's the end of our engagement, I of course am happy to keep going, but I'm also cognizant of everyone's time. So, Oya?
No, I'm also looking at chat questions, and unfortunately, there was no time to address them all. But the good thing is that is there a way to capture questions so that we can maybe continue conversations offline? Or so I don't remember whether Zoom allows you to do that, or sort of to output it as a kind of transcript or something, because but it was very valuable that there was conversation going on, while I was speaking. So that's why I really love online meetings, because and discussions, because there's always like an extra layer to that. And So yes, and I would like to thank you all again for, for your attention, for bearing with me for so, so long, and for, just really the fantastic opportunity for a librarian to be present in this discussion. And I do hope that, something will come out of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you also for your contributions. And again, this speaker series is now over for this summer semester, and we will resume speakers for the fall, dates to be announced. And we are actually, again, seeing all this as the beginning of a conversation rather than the conversation itself. So I'm extremely happy that we, who are all developing curriculum at various parts in our careers, can take these lessons into account and try to apply them. That's really my goal here, anyway.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.